Afternoon. We are back in session and we'll move to our final committee of the day, the Business Operations Committee, chaired by Vice Chair Duncan.
Thank you, Chair Davis. Along with Todd Chastain, we lead the Business Operations Committee. We'll start with three items we have as action on first reading. This Op 1, which is the Emergency Assistance for Non-Public Schools, sometimes called EANS application. The Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, put into law December 27, 2020, established this new program for non-public schools called Emergency Assistance Non-Public Schools. This new program is within the Governor's Emergency Education Relief or GEAR Fund. North Carolina is eligible to receive $84,824,000 from this program. The Governor's office has notified the Chairman of the State Board of Education and the Superintendent of Public Instruction that he intends to apply for the funds February 15, 2021, and has done so. Once North Carolina is approved for funding by the U.S. Department of Education, DPI has 30 days to publish an application for the program, another 30 days to approve or deny the request. This item presents the application for the EANS program. I'll turn to Dr. Townsend to give us some additional details.
Yes, I'm here to speak about the Emergency Assistance for Non-Public Schools Fund, otherwise called EANS. This particular fund comes from the newest coronavirus relief funds. And so Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, otherwise known as ESSER II. It provides $2.75 billion in emergency assistance to non-public schools. And it is actually a part of the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund. North Carolina will receive an estimated $24 million for this fund. Now, if you'll recall, if we go back to CARES Act and the ESSER fund, there were many issues as it related to servicing private schools. Our districts were required to participate in equitable services, and it necessitated them to actually have consultations with private schools and actually provide them with a portion of their funds. This program eliminates that. It gets the money directly out to private schools without having the local LEAs as the intermediary. And so with this particular program, though it does come from the Governor's office, it actually requires that it be administered through the state educational agency, which would be us, DPI. And so in accepting the EANS award, the governor automatically designates DPI to actually administer the EANS program. And so for this program, it is going to take quite a few program partners. And so of course we are working with the Governor's office. We also will be working with the North Carolina State Educational Assistance Authority, or SEAA, the Department of Administration, the Division of Non-Public Education. And then we're also working with the North Carolina Pandemic Recovery Office, or NCPRO. Now, in terms of this particular program, the governor applied for this money back on February 22nd, and we were approved to begin the funding to actually start getting money out on February 25th. This particular fund has a very tight window. It stipulates in law that we have 30 days to actually open an application to the eligible private schools. And so private schools that would be able to participate, they must be nonprofit. And we are looking at servicing up to 730 private schools at this time. We have a 6-month time frame to actually allot those funds. And at that point, the governor can determine how they want to utilize any funds that are left over. And there could be a possibility that they could revert back to public schools. But again, that will be at the governor's discretion. The period of availability for these funds will go through September 30th of 2023. Now, in terms of how these funds are actually being allocated, each of the actual schools will receive a base amount, which is just shy of $11,000. Then they will receive an enrollment share. And then the last part of that allotment is actually due to low income status. So for instance, the share of students that are within their district that actually are eligible to receive Title I funds, as well as the number of students that receive the Opportunity Scholarship. So that formulary looks like this. There would be about 10% of the allocation that is that base amount. 40% would be that enrollment share, so looking at their ADM. 25% based on their service area, based on Title I, and then 25% would come from participation in the Opportunity Scholarship. Now, I am actually going to turn it over to my assistant director, Tina Letchworth, and she's going to tell you a little bit about the actual application and some of the processes that we have been undergoing to get this program kicked off.
Good afternoon. So provided in the material today, you'll find an application template that was provided to NCDPI by the Department of Ed for the non-public schools to apply to participate in the EANS program. So we worked with the NCDPI's IT department to create an electronic application that actually will be a public access SharePoint site. So this will be an electronic application that a link will be provided to the non-public schools who are qualified to apply. And this electronic process has been created so that we can expedite the review and approval of the potential 730 applications that will be coming in. So the next steps that we will do, if you see in the template, the electronic application covers parts A through D of the template to approve the non-public schools to participate in the EANS program. Then the non-public schools will complete Table 1 for reimbursements and Table 2 for future expenditures for amounts that will equal and not exceed the current base planning allotment amount that they have been allotted. Actual allotments will be determined at a later date once a final number of participating non-public schools in EANS is established. 730 have potential to apply, but we will have to determine how many actually apply and are approved to determine actual allocations. As Mr. Duncan mentioned and Dr. Townsend mentioned, applications must be released 1 month from the receipt of the North Carolina approval from U.S. Department of Ed, which was February 25th. So the planned release date for the EANS application will be March 25th. And our division will be providing 2 technical assistance webinars along with our partners participating with us. And all applications will be due on or before April 30th. Year 2 EANS funding require applications to be processed within 1 month of receipt as well. So the April 30th deadline will give an 8-week window for approvals to allow for allotments to be obligated by the end of this fiscal year. So all, as Dr. Townsend mentioned, all program allocation obligations must occur by the 6-month window, which will be August 25th, to meet that established Year 2 period of completion. However, the period of availability to continue to draw on the funds goes until the September 2023 deadline. Dr. Townsend?
That is all we have. Back to you, Vice Chair Duncan.
Thank you very much. So on this action on first reading, we would be asked to approve this application process as is required by the authorizing legislation. Are there any questions about it? All right, not hearing any, let's go on to Biz Op 2, which is action on first reading. This is 21st Century Community Learning Grants, and this is cohort 15, and I think we have dealt with many of these over the years and are starting to get pretty good at understanding what we're looking at here. These are purposes of this grant program is to provide federal funds to establish or expand community learning centers that operate during out-of-school hours. FPMS projects grant awards ranging between $50,000 to $400,000 recurring each year of the grant cycle based on the needs identified in the community and in the specific schools. The scope of the program, the proposed number of students served, and the program design are all taken into consideration. You'll recall we discussed an abbreviated cohort at our last meeting. This is back into the normal cycle with this cohort 15. And Dr. Townsend, I assume you and your colleagues are going to further describe as much as needed with respect to cohort 15 grant program.
Yes, sir. And I won't be before you long. Much of the information is similar to what I presented last month. So the purpose of 21st Century Learning Programs is to establish or expand learning opportunities for students outside of the regular school day. These funds are appropriated through Title IV, Part B of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act as amended by the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSER. In terms of whose availability, it could be school districts, charters, community-based organizations, any non-governmental agency, faith-based organization, IHEs, or any nonprofit corporation who chooses to apply. For this particular grant competition, we will stick with a selection by region. And so we will actually have a set number of entities that we will select across each of the 8 educational regions. And as Mr. Duncan said, these awards will range from $50,000 to $400,000 per year over a 3-year period. And we will allow priority for programs that actually service economically distressed counties or service students who are attending schools that receive Title I Part A funding. In terms of our timeline, these applications will actually open on March 29th. We'll do some preliminary work ahead of that date to really drum up interest. Applications will be due in May, and we should be ready to announce our recommendations for funding in August.
All right, very good. Thank you, Dr. Townsend. Are there, obviously this is early in the process. We'll get the, once the process has gone through, we'll get the proposed recipients, the grants come forward for approval according to the timeline in August. Any questions or comments on this item? All right, not hearing any. Let's go on then to Biz Op 3, the North Carolina Digital Learning Initiative Grants Request for Proposals. And thank you to Dr. Townsend and her colleagues for the first 2 items and all the work they've done on them. This Digital Learning Initiative grant is also not new to us. This is a request for proposals for the 2021-2022 Digital Age Learning Initiative grants available for all PSUs in the amount of up to $1.2 million. North Carolina Digital Learning Plan recommends the provision of grants to support the development and dissemination of local initiative digital learning models. So this really does focus on something unique to the district as part of the application process. The goal is to have effective digital learning practices spread across all of North Carolina in our K-12 schools and in our charter schools, all of whom are eligible to apply for this grant. With that background, I believe we have Jill Darrow and Lindsay Sipes here to provide some additional detail on this proposed grant process.
Thank you so much, sir. Good afternoon, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, and Superintendent Truitt, and board members. My name is Lindsay Sipe, and I am the Southwest Regional Consultant for the Digital Teaching and Learning Division. I'm here with my colleague, Julie Gerganis, and together we lead the Digital Learning Initiative grants. Today, I'm pleased to present to you Digital Learning Initiative grants requests for proposals for the 2021-2022 school year, which we will be opening for all PSUs in North Carolina to apply. The digital learning grants are part of the state digital learning plan to promote adoption and sustain quality digital learning practices across the state. As we focus on equity and excellence, and we hone in on various efforts to try to eliminate the digital divide, these grants work towards that by providing opportunities for all public school units across the state. I want to take a moment to highlight this map. We're extremely proud of the work that has taken place across the state. Our goal is to support public school units as they address challenges, harness opportunities, and leverage resources for digital age teaching and learning. We began the work of the DLI grants in 2017, and this work has continued to build momentum. We're incredibly proud of the progress that has been made in these PSUs in regards to digital teaching and learning. During the 2020-2021 school year, we've provided over $1.6 million to PSUs across the state in the form of 1-year planning grants, 2-year implementation grants, and 3-year Innovation Academy grants. Over the past 4 years, the Digital Teaching and Learning Division has committed over $6.8 million towards these efforts. These grantees have been excellent stewards of their funds as these leaders have worked to plan, implement, and support educators all across the state. I want you to just take a look at the right-hand column where we've had less than 1.2% of those funds have been reverted over the past 3 years on average. We're so proud of their commitment, dedication, and responsibility that they show for having a maximum impact in their districts and schools. With the new round of grants in 2021-2022, the Digital Learning Initiative will plan to commit an additional $1.2 million towards opening up a new round of planning grants for that school year and ongoing funds for the 2-year implementation grants that have been granted this year. Based on the high demand that we've seen for the DLI grants, we're once again presenting a request for proposals for the planning grants for next school year. This grant is intended to target those PSUs at the beginning stages of development. So public school units would use funds to conduct a type of needs assessment by completing the digital learning progress rubric. They would align their efforts with the state's approved efforts and ultimately produce a high quality implementation plan. Traditional public school units may apply for funding for up to $50,000, and charter, regional, and lab schools may apply for up to $15,000. Based upon available funding, we hope to approve about 10 planning grants. The work of digital teaching and learning has very much evolved since 2017 when we began, and it's very important for us to further refine the DLI grant priorities. In previous years, public school units were asked to focus on digital learning competencies for educators, the digital learning standards for students, and or personalized learning. And we believe that these three priorities remain the utmost importance, but we also want to recognize the importance of harnessing innovation by utilizing micro-credentialing, coding, maker spaces, virtual reality, augmented reality, robotics, and or personalized learning as defined by the 4 pillars through the use of learning competencies for educators, digital learning standards for students. We continue our dedication to ensure equitable distribution and opportunities for all North Carolina public school units across all regions. We will utilize regional case managers for dissemination of the planning grant opportunities, as well as digital teaching and learning consultants. And those consultants have great rapport with technical consultants, CTOs, and technology directors across the state. We'll be providing technical webinars that will provide deeper knowledge and understanding of the RFP and the requirements of the grant itself, as well as regional office hours for PSUs in need of additional support for the grant or just grant writing in general. Last fall, the digital teaching and learning team identified a gap within the writing skills, and as a result, we've partnered and contracted grant service support from the Friday Institute. They have built a customized Canvas course with wraparound services and grant writing assistance. And those wraparound services and the course is available to all public school units. And finally, the focus for Tier 2 through our grant evaluation process is focused on balancing regions and ensuring equitable access to all PSUs. We want to provide you with a tentative DLI planning grant timeline. We're hopeful to announce the RFP today if it's approved. We will host a technical webinar on March 9th for all PSUs that are interested in applying for the planning grant. During the actual webinar, we will review and open up the process for requesting access to the Friday Institute Wraparound Canvas site. The application deadline for each of these grants will be April 30th, 2021, and the state board policy for evaluating these competitive grants will be followed, as you can see by Tier 1, 2, and 3 processes being outlined here. And as highlighted in the previous slide, Tier 2 will help review the scope of the grantees by identifying public school units based on DPI priorities, geographic, socioeconomic needs, and available funding, as well as equitable distribution of the grant funds. The Digital Teaching and Learning Division would plan to present the grantee recommendations at the June State Board meeting. To facilitate this timeline, we're asking for action on first reading of this RFP.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the work that's gone into this. Are there questions or comments about this last of our 3 items for action on first reading, so we can move forward with the grant, seeking out the grant proposals? All right, not hearing any, let's move on then to our action items. Our first one is Biz Op 4, Coronavirus Relief Funds Extension of Period of Availability. And just so we all keep our place marker in the same places with all the different funds, it's always important to keep track of which one we're talking about. You recall last year, the Coronavirus Relief Funds, CRF funds, were distributed through the General Assembly in various identified pockets or categories. They were to run out on December 30th, 2020, but because of the ESSER II legislation signed on December 28th, 2020, that was extended for a year. So those funds became good till December 31, 2021. But there are some variations within those funds in terms of when they needed to be spent in order to be appropriately used. So to clean up some of that, Senate Bill 36 was passed, which modified some of the expiration dates, which will require us to modify our allotment policy manual for this distribution of funding. And to lead us through this always delightful allotment process will be Alexis Schaus.
Thank you, sir. Yes, well, that was a good prelude to this item. That is, in your materials, you will see both the modifications to the allotment policy manual to reflect the extension of the CRF programs to December 31st, 2021, in accordance with the federal and the state legislation. It does recommend for GAGL, which is PRC 138, that those funds expire June 30th to be in line with the expiration of the license for which those funds were used. They also expire on June 30th. And then the ELLIS grants, which we're recommending remain as expiring at December 30th because of the late passage of the federal legislation. These grants had been materially closed out by the time the extension was provided. So the policies do reflect those changes, as well as, if you recall, there was authorization for NC Pro to provide us the ability to provide to the school districts flexibility of being able to transfer funds between the CRF allocations. With the state legislation, that flexibility was revoked. So as of February 9th, when the bill was signed, there was no additional transfers between those CRF buckets have been permitted. So that is the other change that you will see in the policy.
All right, are there questions or comments on this change in the allotments for the CRF funds, which were originally federal funding given to the state legislatures to then give out to the appropriate areas around the state, including education, which was in need for coronavirus relief last summer, or late spring was when it was originally distributed. Any questions or comments? All right, not hearing any, let's move on then to ESSER II funds, which we referred to briefly before. ESSER II funds are the bill that was passed in late December and signed by then President Trump on December 28th. And in the allocation was over $50 billion for education to go to the states, to the state education agencies. For North Carolina, that amount came to $1.602 billion, of which a minimum of 90% must be allocated to the public school units according to a set formula approach. What Alexis Schaus is about to discuss with us is that allotment procedure and the allotment distributions there. As an asterisk on this, I think we do need to caution the districts that there is some legislation, at least pending, that would suggest that there would be a requirement, well, not necessarily a requirement, I'm not sure it would be phrased that way, that there would be mandates for certain things to be done. I think summer school is one that's gotten a lot of publicity that might require use of these funds. And so in order to be able to pay for it. So I think it's very important, and say this only to our local districts, to be very careful about noting what the legislative developments are to the extent it affects any funding that might be distributed to their district as part of this 90%. So with that background or backdrop, let's then turn to Alexis Schaus to walk us through this allotment process.
Thank you, sir. So yes, this is the allotment policy for those funds that will be distributed out to the public school units. As stated, a minimum, but per federal legislation, a minimum of 90% of these funds is required to be allocated out to the public school units in the proportionate share that they receive Title I funds in the most recent fiscal year, which is this year. So this is very similar as the policy that was approved for ESSER I funds that we have already distributed and the school districts are already utilizing. The formula is federally dictated, so we don't have any flexibility on that. The use of funds is also outlined in the federal law, and it does provide a very broad and a great deal of flexibility as to how the public school units are permitted to utilize these funds. And of course, keeping in mind the current state laws that are related to it. An important item, just as a reminder, that for federal funds, there is a requirement by the federal law that school districts have to apply for the funds. They will submit that application to our federal programs division along with a budget, and those both the application and the budget is required to be approved prior to allocation. So this policy is providing that authority for us to proceed with allocating, but there is a process within our with financial and business services, with our federal programs area that will take place. It is not a matter of just allocating out funds, which actually we did with the CRF funds. They did not require an application, but this will. So there's been recent several school districts requesting information as to when they will receive the funds. And so I just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware that after this process, the application will be then put into our state system, at which point then the public school units can apply for the funds with their budget. Then the federal programs area will be assessing and approving those budgets before the school districts and the charter schools can receive the funds.
All right, thank you, Alexis. Are there questions on this item. It's obviously a significant distribution of funding. Any questions or comments about the allotment policy that's been proposed for this, for the 90% distribution to the districts? All right, not hearing any. That will bring us then to Biz Op 6, which is our legislative and budget priorities and some additional considerations. As you know, we passed preliminarily a budget at our February meeting. And since that time, continued to work at, continue to be made aware of needs and to be able to assess those. The superintendent's office has worked in conjunction with the board. And as you will recall at our special meeting, made a brief report that it appeared there were some additional things that we did need to include, and we listed the categories at that meeting. And we want to go ahead and approve this revised budget today, but give more detail about the items that are going to be included. And I'm going to turn to Freeburg McKinney and Jamie Falkenberry there's a return performance by them today as a tag team to go ahead and provide the detail on these items for us.
It's actually our third presentation of the day. We did one at the General Assembly earlier.
Many of us are just very upset we missed the other one.
I know. Well, lucky for you, it's the same exact one we're doing right now. This is the same budget PowerPoint that you saw last month. And so we're just going to run through it real quickly, Freebird and I. And if we could just scroll to the next slide. Everything is the same. These are the priorities of the state board. And if you go to the next slide, these are the priorities of Superintendent Truitt and her North Star, getting a highly qualified, excellent teacher. So then what you're seeing now is these are the new updated totals when we've gone back and had to reconfigure some things, as well as add a few that we'll chime in on. But this is our total request that we've presented to the General Assembly of $234,531,175. So if we go to the next page, I'll start off here with the science of reading training. As Freebird alluded to earlier with the House Bill 196, we see in there that in the current legislation that's going through right now, there's $12 million in there for science of reading training and with a specified vendor. And using those numbers now, we're adjusting our amount to about 15 million or 15.5 million. And this would help us train all the necessary teachers, principals, or a cohort of principals and TAs as well. And the reason why this is non-recurring is what our hope is that once we train all of our current teachers, that we then get this into the EPPs before the teachers even get into the system. And we'll continue to monitor that. But this is going to be about a 2-year process to train all the teachers. If you go down to the competency-based education platform, this one increased a little bit because all we included last time was basically if we were to use this education platform or to use an education platform, we only included the platform and the PD, not all the other stuff that it takes to run an operation like this. So this includes everything now on a yearly basis to run a competency education-based platform. And we kind of cheated. We had it all right there for you to begin with. So we'll go to the next page. Here, you can have this one.
School psychology. So there are 2 changes on the student well-being and school safety. We did need to adjust the numbers after we delved a little deeper on school psychologists supplement and also the nationally board certified psychologist 12% supplement. So there are the 2 changes to the numbers. And then if you drop down and go to the next slide, please. This was actually an oversight earlier in the process as we calculated 40 cents copay per meal per day for the number of free and reduced price lunch students. That total number was actually 3.9 million rather than 3 million. And this actually was on our earlier budget request at 3.9. So it was just adjusted to 3. So we need to move that back to 3.9.
education, workforce development plan, everything is stay the same here, as well as connecting middle school and high school to post-secondary career opportunities. So if we go down now to school business modernization slide. This is where we had the biggest increase in our budget to the General Assembly. And this is cybersecurity expansion and training. And especially with everything that's gone on in this digital world that we moved into, where a lot of kids are learning remotely, cybersecurity has become a really hot issue. And we felt that it was needed to be addressed and let the General Assembly truly know what it would cost to provide true cybersecurity to all of our LEAs at the from the state level. And as you can see here, if we go to the next slide. So this is our long-term cybersecurity protection plan. And how we came up with these numbers is we actually, the department had already issued an RFI last year. And the RFI had a plethora of vendors that have responded to it. And using all of those data points, we were able to come up and extrapolate this non-recurring and recurring number. The reason why the recurring number is so high is that's the last point here is there's going to be constant monitoring and human capital necessary for prevention and response. So these will need to be monitored around the clock. If you scroll down to the next slide, this is just again showing the just as a highlight of all of the Superintendent Truitt's the points that she's making with her vision, accountability, literacy, and human capital, how SBSM fits into there. And if we can just go down 2 slides.
So these last 2 support for other agency requests are new line items. The first is Governor School expansion. And this will provide additional funding to DPI for the Governor School, a program that supports summer enrichment activities for talented high school students. The revised net appropriation for Governor School is $1.6 million in each of the year of the biennium. And we did want to lift this up. Without additional funding, the Governor School is at risk of having to reduce services or dramatically increase tuition, and as well as potentially losing out on another host campus. As this board is well aware, last year with High Point University and the support to host the West Governor School there, this would really allow that to expand and continue. The final is the teaching working conditions survey. We are hoping that this could become a yearly survey as a possible opportunity when we're looking at accountability model and different indicators, that this will be something that may be able to be used moving down the road. Also potentially in the development of teacher-led design teams at school. This would allow principals to have a year-to-year understanding of their teacher working conditions, but also allow teachers a voice. So this additional funding would allow not only an increase in the allotment to $200,000 a year, but also a education program specialist to help facilitate this process, as it is a 2-year process currently. So they have enough manpower to be able to do that, but doing it every year would require 1 more FTE addition. And at this point, Mr. Falkenberry and I would welcome any questions that you might have.
Let me get a couple of things out there. One of them, the cybersecurity, we did have that in the budget originally, but in light of ongoing events that have occurred and interest in a number of quarters, the need to raise the cybersecurity protections, not just for the agency, but for the districts, that caused there to be a need to go back and revisit that in light of current events that are occurring. The second thing I think is worthy just for you to confirm that the non-recurring amount within this budget just so as the board sometimes wants to keep track of what's recurring, what's non-recurring. correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that to be approximately what the numbers are. Does that sound right?
Yes.
So with those two pieces of background, we open up for questions. We will ask you to vote on this budget as a change from the original budget, which we passed. There's a reason that if you can get a chance to reconsider and look at it, and the reasons have surfaced here, that we can make this a better budget with these changes. And so I want to open it up though for thoughts from our members and any advisors.
Chair, Vice Chair Duncan, this is Olivia. I have a quick question.
Please, Dr. Oxenine.
Yes, thank you. Jamie, I think Mr. Falconberry probably covered this. It's I think SB 196 and the a little bit over $15 million for sites of reading training. My question is this now, will this vendor be the sole provider of professional development, or will the vendor work in conjunction with our DPI ELA literacy and reading staff to offer the professional development?
So the legislation is clear that the $12 million will be that provider. And then once we figure out what the other funds are, we can have those discussions. But we are going to need additional funding from the General Assembly or try to cobble together funds. But it will cost about 27 million to train all the teachers, TAs, and principals that we're trying to train.
Yeah, I guess my question probably is more rooted in consistency in the training, the professional development. And I certainly don't, I know the answer would be yes, but I just need to hear that. In other words,
our plan is to make this as consistent as possible throughout the entire state. Yes.
So it would be like the trainer model, something like, would it be in that genre?
I'll let I think the superintendent's a lot more qualified to speak on this.
Okay.
Chair.
Please.
Dr. Oxendine, so the vendor that has been indicated in legislation will conduct training statewide, eventually of all pre-K through third grade teachers, that will be both involve asynchronous learning online, as well as face-to-face coaching in the classroom. And so it will be, rather than a train the trainer model, the training will come from the vendor for all teachers. And then as we slowly wean ourselves from the vendor training, we will ensure that we will have K-3 literacy coaches, both at the agency level as well as the district level, be certified trainers in the science of reading.
Okay, that sounds good. And I think I heard some comment about some way to make sure that our EPPs are brought into the picture.
Yes, ma'am. So the UNC system has already committed through their own task force and research to training educator prep program professors in the science of reading. In fact, they have a grant right now. They're actually going to start, I believe this fall, training faculty. So there are 8 literacy fellows spread across the UNC system. And those folks have committed to working with their individual educator prep program institutions.
All right, that answers my question. Thank you very much. And thank you, Vice Chair Duncan.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Let me just ask one that I'm sure may be in some interest to the board. Was there interest in the legislature as you made this presentation earlier in the day to the subject matters that we're now looking at in totality?
I'll speak first and let Freebird opine, but I believe that they were very excited that there's a clear vision coming from this department with a direction, and that we've also focused on the needs of not only COVID recovery, but also a vision for the state that to address learning loss and learning as a whole for years to come. Also, I think it was something we do have to keep in mind, though, is with the General Assembly, it's a little different with OSBM in that the General Assembly likes to see non-recurring numbers a lot more. And so we by looking at these budget items sometimes when we're working with the General Assembly to get what we need to get done, especially if it's IT related, is to ask for a bigger amount, and that because IT contracts can go for longer periods of time and don't revert back. So I think that's just something in mind that we'll keep in constant communication with the board. But overall, I think there are a lot of good questions, and we have some follow up to do with them as well. But overall, I think it went pretty well.
Yes, sir, I would agree with that. And also two areas that there seemed to be the most questions was in teacher recruitment and preparation, as well as district and regional transformation. So we've actually scheduled 2 different follow-up meetings in regard to those questions, and we are looking at doing a presentation specifically on district and regional transformation to approach and ed chairs in the next coming week. So, but I again felt like very receptive overall, great questions. And we did intentionally reiterate the fact that particularly for FTEs, when it comes to specialized instructional support staff and the FTEs related to the district and regional transformation, that we're really seeking recurring funding there to make sure that we don't experience that funding cliff and can truly support our districts and know that they have long-term support and sustainability moving forward.
Very good. Thank you for that additional report, and thank you for the work that you're doing in the legislature for us.
Sir.
Thank you.
Let's send any other questions or comments? Not hearing any, let's go on to Biz Op 7, which is a discussion item. It's the Educational Workforce Innovation Commission report. I believe we have Jacqueline Wyatt with us here today to give us a report on this.
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair Duncan, and good afternoon, members of the board. Last time I met with you all, there was some background noise, so I just want to make sure you're not hearing it this time.
You sound great, and without any.
Okay. So once we get the PowerPoint up, I'll go ahead and get started. All right, great. Thank you so much. Again, so my name is Jacqueline Wyatt, and I speak to you today on behalf of the Education and Workforce Innovation Commission as established under General Statute 115C-64. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. The commission is tasked with overseeing 2 grants, the Education and Workforce Innovation Program Fund, or EWIF, and the Career and Technical Education 6th and 7th grade expansion program. Annually, on or before April 30th, the commission shall publish a report on both grants to be submitted to the State Board of Education, the Joint Legislative Education Oversight Committee, the State Board of Community Colleges, and the Board of Governors of the University of North Carolina. Shifting focus directly now to the Career and Technical Education Expansion Grant, or colloquially known as the Great Expansion Grant. This grant was established to expand CTE programs by prioritizing the inclusion of 6th and 7th grade students. This means hiring personnel such as CTE teachers, career development coordinators, and other CTE support services personnel. Thank you. So for the 2019-2020 school year, the total funding amount was $1.17 million. The grant cycle was for 2 years, for 2019-2020 and 2020-2021. So we're still in the second year of that grant cycle. And awards were made for up to $50,000 per applicant per year. The next grant cycle, just voted by the Education and Workforce Innovation Commission this February, will also be for 2 years. So those years are 2021-22 and 2022-23. So let's now focus on the Education and Workforce Innovation Program Fund, or EWIF. This grant was established to foster innovation in education that will lead to more students graduating. Funds appropriated to the program shall be used to award competitive grants to either an individual school, a local school administrative unit, or a regional partnership of one or more PSUs. These are to advance comprehensive, high-quality education that equips teachers with the knowledge and skill required to succeed with all students. So my favorite way to explain this grant is if you think of it as a triangle. It has 3 points. The first point being the high school, the second point being a higher institution of education, so a public or private university or a community college, and then the third point of the triangle being a partnership with a regional business. So this triangle works together. All 3 points are important, right? And all 3 points together, all 3 entities form this partnership to create a program for the students. So the grant parameters for this grant for the 2019-20 year, the total funding was $1.8 million. The grant cycle was also 2 years, and awards were made for up to $60,000 per applicant per year, with each program being expected to provide a 50% match for however much they applied. The next grant cycle will also be 2 years. So I'd like to shift now to an overview of the local reports, because if you've taken a moment to look at the report, it is quite long. But that's good news, because the program is outlining student success and you know what districts are doing to continue their programs. But as we all know, the programs were directly impacted due to the onset of the pandemic, falling right when the programs would have gotten underway, specifically for the EWIF grant. With that, the most prominent trend for both grants was that the COVID-19 pandemic impacted their ability to carry out grant initiatives per their original proposed program. But PSUs became very creative to maintain their programs for the benefit of the students. Most folks reported that they continued planning or program implementation continued for all recipients, with many saying that they used online measures to connect students to the resources they needed to continue learning and engaging in the programs. So we really saw a lot of innovation in switching to online efforts. So a couple more points for the overview of the local reports. Grant recipients for both grants reported innovative strategies for continuing their programs. With the nature of EWIF, however, it was so vast that many recipients were unable to carry out the face-to-face aspects of their programs. And when I say they're vast, I'd like to expand on that a bit. So I'm going to give you 2 examples. We can look at Gaston County schools and Washington County schools. So Ashbrook High School in Gaston County used the grant to provide an iAccelerate Academy coordinator at the school. This is a magnet program where students were chosen through application and lottery, which gave students the opportunity to complete an associate's degree or earn college credits through Gaston Community College, while having access to programs offered within the comprehensive high school setting. To totally switch focus to Washington County schools, they expanded their CTE program by incorporating a manufacturing career cluster and its associated education and training. So their main focus was on their welding program. So with that, part of their program focused on renovating a building on campus, specifically to focus on welding education. They also purchased much needed equipment and supplies. All right, and lastly, I'd like to take a moment to talk about the hard work by the Education and Workforce Innovation Commission. After the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Commission continued to meet promptly and virtually in order to adhere to its responsibilities and make every possible attempt to provide the grant recipients with any help they needed with their programs. We also worked diligently with folks who reached out with program amendments due to the pandemic in order to provide them with the flexibility they need to continue their programs. So that is it for me. Are there any questions?
Thank you for that informative report, Jacqueline. Are there questions or comments on the work of the commission? All right. Well, thank you very much for the report, and thank you for the work the commission is doing. It's
Thank you.
extremely important. If we don't connect education to employment, we're not getting to all the places we want to be. So the work of the commission is very important. Thank you for it. We next have a consent item, which is Biz Op 8, our relatively routine item of a certification of new finance officers. Any questions? Alexis Schaus is ready to answer them. Not hearing any. Our next item is the monthly budget report, which again, if anyone has any questions, Alexis is here to respond to any such questions. We are going to have some additional discussion about that monthly budget report in the future, but we're focused on getting our budget completed and successfully passed right now. But we will be coming forward with some further discussion points, much like Alexis did recently with the allotment policies, which I think the board found very eye-opening in education. We're also going to have discussion like that about the budget reports as well. On the agency vacancy report, Ron Paxton, I think, would like to report to us today with some information about that report. So Ron, welcome. We're glad to have you.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. What I'd like to do, the first 5 slides, and can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Sir.
Okay. The first 5 slides really are the same format and content that we've had in the past. And if there's not any questions on those, I'd really like to move to slide 6. And that's where we put together some further detail around the vacancies for DPI that we reported on the 15th of February. So for DPI, and these numbers do not include the residential schools. We had a total of 74 vacant positions, and 41 of those positions had no recruitment activity. So that's a point that we wanted to expand on. And when we look at those 41 positions with no recruitment activity, we broke out the 2 smaller pie charts. The chart on top shows where those positions are within the organization, and the chart on the bottom shows the funding sources for those 41 positions. And the funding is important because when we look at our availability to reallocate or reassign positions, the funding source is one of the key variables, because if the position has restrictive funding, then our ability to reassign that position is also restrictive based on the criteria that drives that funding. So when we looked at, of those 41 positions, 14 had appropriated funding. Those are the ones that we would look at as having an opportunity for us to evaluate to see where they are and what we need to do. And with those, when we look at those 14, the first one, the Safe Schools position, is a position that since the 25th, or the 15th rather, we have filled that position. The second one has been reallocated and is now in recruitment. And the third one is also has a requisition in process. The one in finance is also something that's being, since this has come about, has some activity. The IT vacancy is a new vacancy. It was only 7 days old at the time. In ISD, that position is one that has no funding. And we had an opportunity last year to review that. We decided not to reduce in force. So we've got a position that exists, but just really doesn't have any funding at this point. The district operations positions are new vacancies. One's a projected vacancy and one's one that's just happened in the last week or so. In the super's office, we've got one in audit that's being evaluated, and 2 in communications that are since this report have started moving toward the recruitment. So when we look at, you know, those appropriated positions, those 14 positions with no recruitment activity, of the ones in that appropriated group, we're moving them and taking action on those, you know, in a timely manner, I feel like. So if we were to go to the next slide, we also looked at our 74 vacancies by the number of days the position's been vacant. And my trigger here was, if it's over a year old, we need to look at it. So that top slide to the right, again, goes to where those positions are within our organization. And then the bottom slide shows when we have 365 days old positions that have no recruitment, we need to take a peek at those. And some of the ideas around that, the HR position is one that when I came in, I came in on the 17th of February, and we went home on the 10th of May, or March rather, and we had some plans. The COVID pandemic came along. We now have a new administration coming in, and we're going to go back and revisit that position. So it's a timing issue there. It's not that we don't have plans and intent for that position. That second position has been reallocated and put back on Alexis's team in finance, where we've got a big need. Again, we can go through each of these if you like, but of those, funding is an issue. The district operations positions and the licensure positions are federal funded and receipt funded positions. And that doesn't mean that we don't need to fill them. It does mean that we're very limited on what we can do with other options. Some points I'd like to note, and just in overall, since September, we've reallocated 29 positions. And of those 29 positions, 15 were more than 1 year old. So we identified old positions, and when we could, we reallocated those. And 17 of those 29 positions have been filled. 2 will be filled as soon as we have 2 people that are being appointed. As soon as they start, those 2 positions will be filled. And the remaining 10 are vacant that we are actively recruiting to fill those positions. And then of those 29 positions, where were they reallocated to? 14 were reassigned to the district and regional support team or the literacy team. 8 were reassigned to the superintendent's incoming team and building that team we have there. And as you saw today, she talked about 3 of those today in her special advisors. And then 7 of those 29 positions were assigned to other areas. Our percentage of vacancies that are over a year old, as we compare to all vacancies, is currently at 30%. However, if we just go back to October, that percentage was 40%. So when we look at the numbers and we look at what we're doing, we're making progress in the right direction. We're identifying opportunities to make sure that we're using these assets in the right way to drive the business going forward. And we will continue to do that. So if anyone has any questions, I hope this information was helpful. I know there's been, additional questions, and I tried to get to as many of those as I could see.
Fine, thank you. It's a very informative report. Those last 2 charts were particularly good additions, I think, and your walking through them, I think, was helpful. There may be some questions, comments. Yes, Chair Davis.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. Paxton, thank you so much for this report and even more for the progress you're making. Perhaps a way of further highlighting the progress you're making is to put the information maybe in a month-to-month chart so that we see how you're knocking down the vacancies, filling positions, and lowering the numbers each month, and then we can celebrate together. So that's one thought. Second is I hear from time to time the challenges that your team and our agency face in filling positions because, frankly, the page is inadequate to get the that we need. And just wondered if there was any opportunities, perhaps in reclassifying or other actions that would ensure we get the talent that we need.
And that's one of the things that we are continuing to look at. And to be quite honest, putting these two slides together gives us, gives me some focal points to go back to and ask those questions again. And I know that we've got a meeting next week regarding some positions that if we're not getting the candidates that the hiring manager feels comfortable with, then we need to find a solution. Either we need to recruit a different way or we need to look at reclassification. But we do need to identify those areas and put a plan against those. I agree 100%.
Thank you. Additional questions or comments? All right, not hearing any, we have two additional items left, the executed contracts report and the planned contracts report. Ms. Shannon Hanchey is available if there are any questions on either of those reports. I have not heard any from the board to this point, but if there are any, please go ahead and ask them now. All right, not hearing any. Chair Davis, I return to you, and with thanks to all the people who worked hard on these BizOp items.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. I add my thanks to yours to our staff who's working hard on these. Colleagues, we have two new business items that we'll quickly explore. First is the need for an additional rulemaking coordinator, and in Mr. Zyko's absence, I'll turn to Dr. Townsend Smith to explain this item.
Thank you, Chair Davis. Thank you, board members. As you know, we are subject to the rulemaking process. As Mr. Zyko is transitioning in his responsibilities, we are wanting to have Mr. Brandon Walker, who is your other legal counsel, assume some of those responsibilities with the rulemaking process. And they do allow multiple rulemaking coordinators, and so he will assume some of those responsibilities.
So the point of this action is to make that appointment as additional rulemaking coordinator. Any questions on this particular action? Hearing none. The second item of new business concerns the school reopening resolution that we referred to earlier during DHHS's report to us. This specific resolution can be found in your materials under new business. And essentially this resolution, combined with the adoption of the Strong Schools Toolkit, which will also be part of our action item, is to express the board's commitment and determination to return our students to in-person instruction as soon as safely possible. Over the last few days, many of our local school boards have acted to return to in-person instruction by the end of March, and we're grateful for that. However, this resolution sets the end of March for all PSUs to be into Plan A, B, or a combination thereof by the end of the month. So I'll now ask Mr. Hall to read the resolution. Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The North Carolina State Board of Education, a joint resolution of the North Carolina State Board of Education and the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, March 3, 2021. Whereas the North Carolina State Board of Education and the North Carolina Superintendent of Public Instruction believe and acknowledge that in-person learning provides students with the opportunity for academic achievement, and whereas the North Carolina State Board of Education and the North Carolina Superintendent of Public Instruction believe that in-person learning can be provided in a manner that is safe for students and staff if provided in accordance with the public health recommendations found North Carolina Strong Schools Toolkit promulgated by the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, and whereas scientific understanding of the methods of transmission of the COVID-19 virus has advanced significantly since the public schools of North Carolina closed for in-person learning in March of 2020, such that preventive measures can now be effectively employed in schools to deter the spread of the virus. And whereas school staff have now afforded the opportunity to begin receiving COVID-19 vaccinations. It is hereby resolved by the North Carolina State Board of Education and the North Carolina State Superintendent of Public Instruction that the governing boards of all North Carolina public school units shall resume providing all students enrolled in grades kindergarten through 12 with the option of in-person learning to the fullest extent possible, consistent with the guidelines in the North Carolina Strong Schools Toolkit, and the health and safety needs of the students, beginning no later than the end of March of 2021, and that such governing boards shall adopt plans to accomplish this reopening as soon as possible. And it is further resolved that any action to reopen schools for in-person learning shall be in accordance with the North Carolina Strong Schools Toolkit promulgated by the North Carolina Health and Human Resources K-12. It is further resolved that the North Carolina State Board of Education and the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, in accordance with Session Law 2020-49, approve an official guidance for in-person instruction for the remainder of the 2020-21 for all elementary and secondary public schools in North Carolina. The North Carolina Strong Schools Toolkit, K through 12, is most recently amended on March 4, 2021. It is further resolved that the Secretary to the State Board shall enter a copy of this resolution into the official minutes of the North Carolina State Board of Education, signed by Eric C. Davis, Chairman of the North Carolina State Board of Education, Kathleen Truitt, Superintendent of Public Instruction, March 3, 2021.
Yeah, just one clarification. We'll update that to be March 4th.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Hall.
You're welcome.
It's on our resolution. Hearing none, this will be placed on our action on first read agenda. So that concludes our new business items. Board members will now vote on any items requiring action from your committee reports and our work in this meeting. Thorough discussion and report was provided on each item, including any respective consent items. Please remember that any item on the consent agenda is primarily not complex and may have come to the board for discussion in a prior month. Note also that board members have seen these consent items for at least a week. I note for the record that Ms. Kamnitz has recused herself from BizOp 2. Before seeking a motion, I'd like to revisit EICS 3, and I turn to Chair of EICS Committee, Ms. White.
Thank you, Chair Davis. Yesterday, we had a robust discussion about the charter schools, which are before the State Board of Education for renewal for this. Board members, I just want to walk you through a little bit of what that renewal process includes. So the Office of Charter Schools compiles a renewal portfolio for each and every school that's up for renewal every year. And that portfolio is going to consist of information that is gathered through DPI compliance forms, an actual renewal site visit to each and every school, academic and enrollment data of not only the school, but also the LEA in which the school resides. And then OCS provides that portfolio findings and takes that to the Charter School Advisory Board, in which that totality of information, the Charter School Advisory Boards decided this particular year, out of the 18 schools which were up for renewal, they brought back 12 for interviews in order for them to gain a better understanding of the school's actual situation. So that's how we got to the 18 that are on the list today. During the board meeting yesterday, we had some terrific questions. We had some communication from those that are charter school advocates in the community that provided additional information for us to consider. And just want to let you know that particularly for schools on the list, which might be low performing or continually low performing, that those schools must provide a thorough account for that performance each and every year. And more importantly, they have to provide the strategies that the school is going to use to address those deficits. And CSAB is going to work with OCS to make sure that those schools are aware of the supports and the training opportunities offered to help them travel the road along the road of continuous improvement. Colleagues, I just want you to know that this past year has been difficult. That's absolutely no surprise. To say the least, learning loss will be felt in our classrooms this year and for years to come. And I want to implore you to remember that with the waivers in place for testing for 2019, 2020, and again in 2020, 21, there really won't be meaningful, valid testing data available to better evaluate any school's performance, but particularly these schools that are up for review this year. So in this vacuum year, we're asking you to approve the recommendations of the CSAB committee, comprised of individuals who have, if you can believe it, a combined 272 years of experience in the field of education, and that who at their core want the best possible academic outcome for all students in North Carolina's public charter schools. So with that, I feel like there might be an additional comment or two that I'd like to open the floor now for colleagues if anyone has an additional question or comment. Vice Chair Duncan.
Yes, thank you, Ms. White. I would like to propose a friendly amendment that would be in addition to the recommendation that's been made by the committee. So the committee, the recommendation would go first, and I would propose this friendly amendment would go at the end of the recommendation for vote by the board. The proposed language would be further that the EICS Board Committee, in consultation with the Department of Public Instruction with CSAB, undertake a review of the charter school renewal process and come back to the state board for discussion of proposed revisions to, clarifications of, proposed guidelines for how such renewal requests should be processed for recommendations by the department and CSAB, and then handled for proposed approval by the state board. Further, that the recommendations for how to best proceed with this renewal process come back to the board by its September 2021 monthly meeting for discussion and thereafter approval by the board. The intent of this motion is obviously there were a number of issues that were raised, and as you said, it was a very good discussion that was held yesterday. And throughout the course of that discussion, to reiterate, there was never an intent to suggest that any of these schools would not receive some renewal. The question was the length of time. And some questions arose in addition about the process. And the conclusion, I think, was that obtaining greater clarity about the process long-term will be a real benefit to the board and will be a helpful thing. So as we move forward, I would propose and ask for this friendly amendment to be considered by you and the other proponents of the motion.
I accept the friendly amendment.
Thank you.
Very good. Anything else, Ms. White?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so for clarity, colleagues, the motion is to approve EICS 3 recommended by the EICS committee with the friendly amendment attached. Any questions on that? Very good. Okay, at this time, I ask if there's a request to remove any item from the consent, action, or action on first reading agenda.
Chair Davis,
Dr. Oxendine?
this is Ms. Kamnitz.
Oh, excuse me, Ms. Kamnitz, yes.
I'm looking for inclusion in the recommendation regarding the federal waiver being granted and then seeking state relief as well. Is that?
Yes, I will include that in the motion.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Chair Duncan?
I believe we had an item that would not be covered by any of these actions items to propose a $1.5 million allocation of ESSER II administrative funding that would go to certain positions, or is it included in one of the?
I have that in the motion as well.
Very good.
Yes.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. This is what a team's all about. Second round. Anything else that anyone has any questions on? Okay, hearing none. And here's the real test. I ask for a motion to approve the following. The February 3rd and 4th, 2021 meeting minutes, the February 24th, 2021 meeting minutes, and the following committee items. EICS 1 through 7 and 13 through 14, SLA 1 through 7, ES&P 1 through 3, BizOp 1 through 6 and 8, and HRS 1. And then the following additional items. The additional rulemaking coordinator appointment, IPL and ILT licensure approvals, residential school hire recommendations discussed last evening in closed session, the adoption of the revised DHHS Strong Schools Toolkit as presented today, and the reopening schools resolution read into our minutes today. The superintendent's request for ESSER II funding for the Office of Learning Recovery discussed in closed session, and to authorize the superintendent to seek waivers from the General Assembly for state accountability measures. Is there a motion? Motion by Ms. White. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Lieutenant Governor. Any discussion on this motion? Hearing none, Dr. Townsend Smith, we call the roll to capture the vote.
Yes, sir. Dr. Oxendine,
Yes.
Ms. Chemnitz,
Yes.
Mr. Keenan. Mr. Keenan. Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers. Dr. Tipton Rogers.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Keenan. Dr. Tipton Rogers. Ms. White,
Yes.
Mr. Chastain,
Yes.
Mr. Ford,
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers,
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell. Treasurer Falwell. Lieutenant Governor,
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell. Vice Chair Duncan,
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes. Motion carries. That concludes our action items for this meeting. I want to thank all staff and presenters for this March 4th, 2021 meeting, as well as board members and colleagues. I now ask for a motion to adjourn this March 4th, 2021 meeting. Motion by Lieutenant Governor, second by Vice Chair Duncan. Dr. Townsend Smith.
Yes, sir. Dr. Oxendine,
Yes.
Ms. Chemnitz,
Yes.
Mr. Keenan,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers,
Yes.
Ms. White,
Yes.
Mr. Chastain,
Yes.
Mr. Ford,
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell, Lieutenant Governor,
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan,
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes. Motion carries. We stand adjourned. Have a good day.
Still live, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Lieutenant Governor.
We do
Appreciate it.
We do appreciate you.